We have a distinguished group of panelists today. We're going to talk about the gubernatorial election and anything else of interest going on in the election season. And why don't we bring the panel up here, and I'll introduce them one by one as they come. First, we've got Bernie Schoenburg, political writer of the State Journal-Register and my longtime cubicle mate. Amanda Vinicky, State House Bureau Chief from WUIS. Dave McKinney, State House Bureau Chief of the Chicago Sun-Times. And Madeleine Doubek, my colleague from Reboot Illinois. She's Chief Operating Officer at Reboot. And I want to start off here just by opening the discussion. Everyone here on the panel, with the exception of Madeleine, for the last 2 days has spent a significant part of the day listening to the gubernatorial candidates make speeches, and we've watched supporters rally behind them and whatnot. I want to go around the horn here and just get a few impressions from what did you take away from the last 2 days of Governor's Day at the fair and yesterday's Republican Day at the fair. Bernie, you want to kick it off?
Oh, sure. Well, I think everybody knows it's going to be a very intense year. The polls have Rauner ahead, so let's start with Republican Day first. Bruce Rauner, who, by the way, made it out to the fairgrounds, followed by a whole bunch of other people on motorcycles that gathered outside the convention center yesterday. He knows how to make a good entrance. He's been 10 or 11 points up in the polls. All the speakers leading up to him were saying how enthusiastic everybody in the crowd was. I'm not sure it was that loud, but, it was okay. There is definitely enthusiasm for his candidacy and the feeling that with his resources, and he's given more than $1 million to the party to get that apparatus moving, that there is an opportunity for change. Obviously, the fact that there's been a lot of bad news in Illinois and about the economy over the past several years helps a lot, because he talks about putting Pat Quinn into the dustbin of history and some of that negative political talk. So people are excited about it, but there are also cautionary notes that from some of the officials, including like Jim Durkin and Judy Bartopinka, okay, we're riding high today, but be careful. It's a blue state, and things could change, and if you don't keep the momentum going, you're in trouble. So the message is there's enthusiasm. He's trying to not deal too much with controversies of himself, really making the state look bad and highlighting the problems that Quinn has had. The name Blagojevich, who Quinn really didn't talk to for the last year and a half that they were in office together, is usually half of the Quinn name now. The Blagojevich-Quinn administrations have just ruined this state, driven it into the ground. Okay, on the other side, the Democrats are hopeful that Quinn's come from behind can do what it did last time with, Bill Brady. Apparently, people were saying they were fitting curtains in the mansion. That didn't work too well. Somebody should have fixed the roof in the meantime, but clearly Quinn doesn't mind being the underdog. It is a blue state, but there's no Barack Obama at the top of the ticket. So at the county chairman's breakfast at the Crown Plaza, the Democratic group, there was some pretty intense talk. I guess the most intense was when Tammy Duckworth, who is the war hero, who lost her legs when her helicopter was shot down, said that Bruce Rauner putting money in the Cayman Islands is a deserter. This is that's a really serious military term. Senator Mark Kirk on the next day said, we really shouldn't talk that way. That used to be a capital offense, and when we're talking politics and where money goes, you ought to be careful. So the Democrats are come from behind. They're really trying to play a lot on Bruce Rauner's millions. And I'm not sure how far that goes with people, but it will definitely be, this class warfare thing will definitely be part of the campaign. And, it's funny, somebody I know closely said when they heard Quinn talking about people who live paycheck to paycheck, well, who wants to do that? Well, a lot of people do, and Quinn has been winning elections for 30 years talking about paycheck to paycheck, and I've been making fun of that phrase for years. As Madeleine, who will talk to you, wrote in a column earlier in the week, Rauner's up now, but it's really too early to call because things can happen, and 3 months to the election is a really long time.
Amanda, what were your thoughts?
Oh, what can I add to that? Bernie, let's see. Yeah. It's So exactly, the election is way too early to call. In the state fair, it's all about enthusiasm. So taking into account that people were cheering for their candidates, well, of course, these are the party faithful. That's who you get out there. They're going to cheer. It's fun, and they've been given a whole lot of free beer. So that helps. But I think that in addition to that, some of the takeaways were just how, and we can talk more in depth about this later, but how disciplined both of these candidates are. And so you are getting these canned speeches, canned statements from both of them. There isn't a whole lot of policy being discussed at this point because it's class warfare in every direction / throw the guys who've been in power out. And there are, of course, some policies behind those notions. And yet, again, that doesn't really get to the forefront. It's, all right, let's hit briefly on the minimum wage. Let's hit briefly on the state's financial situation. Let's completely ignore talk of what we're going to do in terms of taxes. And again, these are speeches. It makes sense. That doesn't necessarily get people riled up unless it's in the wrong way. But nonetheless, you're not getting a lot of that. Instead, it is kind of almost juvenile tactics, be it with mascots or, yes, making an entrance with a motorcycle coming in, and yet it's a lot of show at this juncture. And I guess it'll be our job to try and press through that. You can tell a lot about kind of what the media is asking and differences between the media here and the Chicago media. For example, Quinn has clearly made a point with the Chicago media from all of the questions and what they were saying in terms of, will Rauner release his taxes? He's released some of his taxes thus far for the past couple of years, but not the full schedules, not everything that goes behind it, and not yet for this past year. There's a lot that we reporters and whomever may be able to learn from those, but they're pressing it and trying to make this really into a, do you trust Quinn or do you keep Quinn, or do you trust this guy who's coming in, and why is he coming? Quinn, I do think going to the Democratic event, it really was pretty similar to the past several years. You didn't get that much of a different feeling. Maybe a bit more anti-Republican versus just yay Democrats, but it didn't, to me, have a ton of that flavor of that they were frightened, per se. You had to really ask about it. And when you got that, I think it was in some of the more nuanced responses. Nobody's going to say, no, we don't think it's good, except for, oh, wait, Secretary of State Jesse White. And that was really actually very surprising to me, that he said, yeah, I'm concerned. And when asked directly, if the election were today, would Quinn win? Because sure, there are polls, but it's more than just a poll. It's a whole different thing to actually go to vote and go to the ballot box. That he said, I don't know, basically. It's a dog's race. And that was a surprising takeaway.
And he also made the accusation that he thinks Bruce Rauner is trying to buy the
Just
African-American vote on Chicago's South Side, which, because he pledged to deposit $1 million into a credit union that serves lends to South Side businesses. So, which I thought was, pretty shocking, but we haven't, that kind of was a story for about a half a day, and then it's gone away.
I'm not sure. I think that is a story we could see return in some fashion. Rauner continually says that he's trying to reach into areas that have long been Democratic bastions, and particularly the African American vote. And it's money. He says, I've been doing this forever, and sure, you can see actual buildings that say Rauner on it. Yes, he's been giving money all over the place in Chicago for quite some time, but I think that could return. At what point is it, buying votes? And he's not going to take a salary. He wants to travel the world to help Illinois businesses on his own dime. That was part of his agriculture plan. There's a lot that Rauner says he wants to foot the bill for, and he has the money to do it. You look at Mayor Bloomberg, and that was, at the end, I think people were kind of all right with it. But in the beginning, I think that you're going to get some of those accusations, and particularly as he tries to make inroads into the minority communities, and we'll see if that actually changes things, if there are African-American votes or voting blocks that go with him. That's, I think, going to be a continued thing to follow and to watch. Go ahead,
Dave, do you have anything to add to all that?
There we go. Is that better? Yeah. Okay. my takeaway is a little bit different than Amanda's, just in terms of the energy level in both of those days that we saw this week. I mean, before all of this, I had set out to try to do a little blog piece on, some of the highs and lows over the last 20 years at these political days, because it's just fascinating. It's like, I love covering these political days, because what you do when you go out there is you sort of get a general sense of each of the political parties based on how many people are there, the enthusiasm level, the slate of candidates. And there's certainly been a ton of memorable moments out there. But what I came away with yesterday after the Republican Day was the sense that this was very much like a day in the late 1990s when Republicans were, running things. They had the governorship then, of course. There was that level of enthusiasm. They had what we saw during much of the decade in the early 2000s was that, they would bring out Jim Edgar and they would bring out Judy Topinka as sort of the symbols of the gravy days of the 1990s. And they had this lineup of candidates there, the Alan Keyeses of the world. And it was almost during that period as if to say, we can be like we once were, but yet they didn't have the firepower to do it. This time, they clearly have the firepower to do it. They have a candidate in Rauner who, as Amanda and Bernie have said, has got immense wealth and resources to throw at this, and it's just percolating through every level. I mean, we saw people, you get a sense even these no-name candidates who were kind of on kamikaze missions against Jesse White and Attorney General, that they might even be getting some resources. A guy named Mike Webster, who, I thought he was a Pittsburgh Steelers center, but he's running against the Attorney General. But you hear a guy like that
Against Jesse.
Or against Jesse, I'm wrong. But you get an idea from those guys. Even they're getting benefited from it. So the Republican Party is clearly on a rebound. But what I think Rauner himself even said yesterday is, look, we're ahead double digits in the polls right now. It's tough playing with the lead, and anybody who follows sports knows that. If you're playing football or basketball and you're ahead at halftime by 30 points, then there almost kind of becomes this. It's not a laziness, but it's just like you take your foot off the pedal a little bit. And I think that honestly is worrying the Republicans right now. On the Democratic side, Quinn has had this problem over the last couple of years where, he just would go out to the fair and it would just be this horrible political optic that he would face because he was always tangling with unions. A couple of years ago, I mean, he was jeered off the stage by AFSCME members, and it was, for all of us covering it, it's just like your jaw hits the ground on a day like that, and you think, well, why on earth would anybody put their candidate in front of this? And what we saw this year was a much more, I think, disciplined approach. I think, in the Democratic Party as a whole, there is a bit of panic. I think it's interesting to, one of the things I thought was really interesting at the Governor's Day was that you have Mike Kerrigan, the president of the AFL-CIO, being the MC, and you get a sense that labor grudgingly is coming home to Pat Quinn, and to what extent that's going to happen, we'll see. But that to me is really a key. How enthusiastic is labor going to be behind Pat Quinn? And I think in Rauner they see a guy who talks about right to work. He loves Scott Walker. He loves Mitch Daniels. That puts genuine fear into labor, even though labor is, in this lawsuit with the Quinn administration right now, which is the oddest of things. You've got that happening against the backdrop of the election. So I thought, that was a takeaway. Both parties seem very energized to me. I also think a takeaway is that in both candidates, Quinn and Rauner, they clearly are both willing to stretch the truth. And when I say that, I mean, we hear from Bruce Rauner yesterday that Pat Quinn is under criminal investigation. Well, Pat Quinn, to the best of our knowledge, is not under criminal investigation. A program he ran, the Neighborhood Recovery Initiative, in 2010, is under criminal investigation, but Quinn himself is not. And so, a little bit loose and fast with the facts there, I thought. Quinn is doing the same thing to Rauner, where with this Cayman Islands story, he's just outright calling Rauner a tax evader. Well, we don't know that, and we're not probably going to know much about his taxes, as Amanda pointed out, because he made clear at the fairgrounds yesterday, he's not going to release his attachments. We're not going to see, where his investments are at. We're not going to see what kind of tax shelters and tax deductions he takes. They're just not going to give that up. So I think what we have in our hands now is an election that is going to get much tighter, and these double-digit polls are they're not going to stand. I think we're going to see a race that gets decided in suburban Cook County, and it's also going to be decided in Chicago by the turnout we get for Quinn. I don't think Rauner has much of an issue in the collar counties or downstate. I think that's solidly in his corner. The battleground is suburban Cook and Chicago.
Excellent. I would just, these guys are excellent, so not a whole lot more to add except to say that I think this thing gets uglier and we haven't seen anything yet in that regard. So far it's really been about nothing but mascots, and that's alarming, I think, for a lot of us. And fear is very much a motivating factor, and it seems to me as if the Democrats are a little more fearful than the Republicans. And the remaining question is whether that rust can get knocked off the Republican organization and whether that really comes back to life enough to make up for those Democratic votes in Chicago and the battleground that you just referred to in the Cook County suburbs.
We're enough in time. I mean, I think Rauner is clearly infusing the Republican Party with some energy, but clearly more, it's energy because there's money. As Comptroller Judy Bartopinka said, things are a lot easier. You can make a difference when you have the cash to be able to do it. And so he is doing that with offices, with ground operations, places that they haven't been before, and data, and it's a whole new style of campaign. He knows who to target. They know what to say, which is part of, again, why it just gets such a icky feeling, I think. When there's fear in people, first, they maybe stoop to levels that they wouldn't if they were at their very best, number one, and also it's also very manufactured, and it's the changing face of campaigns. We saw in this election cycle initial announcements, and they were going to be candidates made on YouTube instead of with appearances. And I mean, there's so much of that. Evelyn Sanguinetti, for example, the wannabe cow tipper, didn't really make an appearance. Bernie, got her, and I'm sure he would love to chat on that.
Fair, but not in
but right, you keep her sheltered in a way, kept in the tent, and then brought right back there afterward.
She said she was with her family in the morning, and the kids were down.
One of the things that has struck me throughout this campaign, Quinn has really hammered away at the plutocrat, the billionaire. Dave, you mentioned that the truth gets stretched sometimes. Bruce Rauner has said he's not a billionaire technically. He's got hundreds of millions, of course. And but one thing that has struck me is that Quinn has hammered away at this, he's an out-of-touch billionaire, and yet when you see Rauner at an event like yesterday's at the State Fair, I've been struck by how he really comes off as very personable, not aloof, riding in on the Harley. How much is that going to resonate?
Yeah. He clearly enjoys that more than anybody we've seen for a while. Even with Quinn is Quinn, but there's something a little bit stilted to me about his whole campaign persona. Bruce Rauner seems very comfortable in his own skin to me and enjoys what went on yesterday.
Right. Now, having said that and given him credit for that, he is a candidate like we haven't seen before, at least in my memory, in that he is an outsider. Quinn, I mean, he's been involved and he's donated and things, but he doesn't have a voting record. And he can pretty much stay quiet about a lot of stuff, and he's stayed very, very, very quiet about a whole lot of things. What do you think, what are we going to hear from Bruce Rauner between now and November? Are we going to...
And the couple times that he has said things, it hasn't worked out very well this summer. He's not really had a great summer.
Right.
The first time he put out a policy position, it was prairie chickens. And that just became a debacle almost. And so I think that, then he put out another level of that, and it was essentially him admitting that he might need to raise a few taxes. And so, I think that unfortunately the message has been reinforced that they're better off if he keeps quiet about what he intends to do if he becomes governor.
I think that Bruce Rauner has proven, and many people have said this, unlike other rich folks who get into this for the first time, he is very comfortable with people. He loves dealing with people. He gets energy out of a crowd. He's He's good at shaking hands. He's also not necessarily good for the people up here, and by extension, perhaps the public. He's very disciplined in not taking questions too often or more than he wants. So most candidates, the other day Quinn was talking to the press when he cut the ribbon at the state fair, and his press person said about 5 times, "Last question," and Quinn just kept taking questions, partly because he feels confident to answer them and he wants to explain his side. Whenever Rauner's person says last question, he takes one more and then he walks away and will not say a word, no matter if there's something hanging in the air, no matter if it's just what color are your shoes. He will not answer it. Yesterday morning, as he arrived at the Hilton in Springfield, where the Republicans had their joint meeting of the state party and the county chairs, didn't take questions going in, didn't take questions going out. His staff had, everybody else who goes to those things stops and talks to reporters. Bruce Rauner did not. So he said, I'm only going to take questions his people had said at the fairgrounds. So there was about 8 minutes where after the motorcycle, with the motorcycle in the background and people that had to be stopped from cheering during the questioning, that 8 minutes is all he gave to reporters yesterday for actual Q&A. It is very different from other candidates. It might work, but it also leaves gaps in what we know about him, and that's very troubling.
It's very
So
much
what do
like
we do
Rahm
about
Emanuel.
that?
What do we do about that? We keep asking questions. I am sometimes the one who tries to ask that last question and follows him. Well, you know, when the Sun-Times did a story that he bought a parking space in a building in Chicago that was $100,000, which I understand for a downtown condo may not be, you know, out of there, but he also, you know, when we're debating the minimum wage, that's obviously a populist kind of a story that I'm sure the Quinn people are happy to see, but he was at the Prairie Capital Convention Center in Springfield at an appearance before the American Legion that was not announced until that morning, so reporters didn't have a lot of notice to get there.
He's not alone in that, I'll add.
That's true, and Quinn has been doing some, I'll take no comments at some events, but still, anyway. But, you know, as he ended the press availability there after talking to the veterans, you know, I asked, did you really pay this much for that garage space? He shut up, he walked, I walked after him, he asked, I said, don't you know what, you know, why wouldn't you know this? Well, it's similar to other situations that he's been in. You know, how much land do you own in Montana and Wyoming? Is it hundreds of acres or thousands? I own a lot of land, and he wouldn't say. And then I find out months later when the Tribune did a story, because they had to go and look up land records, that he owns 6 square miles of Montana and Wyoming, you know, 23,000 acres. So you don't get answers. I've never in, you know, more than 30 years of reporting said to someone who's running for office who is a farmer, how many acres do you have? They will tell you, I farm 1,500 acres. Bruce Rauner won't tell you and doesn't care that he's not telling you.
He might not know.
I don't know.
I think that there is legitimate, when you own that much, maybe you don't know, I'm not sure.
You know, I think it's interesting with Rauner, though. The Democrats have been trying really hard to penetrate his business empire. And, you know, you think about a candidate running for governor who has an interest in a company and 2 of its executives, or an executive and then a trader, wind up, you know, getting indicted by a criminal grand jury in New Jersey. You would think that would be fodder for the Democrats to exploit. But yet what we see with that, what we've seen with other instances, the nursing home story, for example, he's set up these companies under GTCR in such a way where, as he says, he's 5 layers removed from, you know, any problems. And so, you know, I think that's a difficult thing when you have a candidate not answering questions, when you have a candidate who has a business structure that's not subject to the FOIA, and we don't really have a way to look inside other than through like the Securities and Exchange Commission or things like that. It's very difficult to penetrate and to find things on him, and that's why I think that's why we're seeing the Democrats try to exploit the wealth component, because it's an easy thing for people to understand. It's an easy thing for them to go out and tout a $100,000 parking space. Who has one of those? But I think the real story with Rauner, and it might emerge as we, you know, if he succeeds, I mean, it might emerge down the line. I think we're going to see this, you know, some of his past business issues maybe come out and be a little more enlightened. I mean, people involved in those companies who were treated the wrong way might want to come forward and talk, or people who lost money in these deals might come forward and want to talk. But you know, man, I know having in the primary, I spent probably 6 weeks of my time looking at Bruce Rauner and nursing homes. And in the end, I wound up not even writing a story about it, even though I was close to pulling the trigger like 3 or 4 times. But that story at the core seemed very simple to tell, and that was Bruce Rauner's company owned a chain of nursing homes, and a lot of bad things happened in those nursing homes. I mean, that's easy for people to understand. It's easy as a reporter to tell that story. But when you look at it, well, all right, he didn't own the company at the time these women died. There is litigation going on in 3 different venues by these victims' families about did Rauner and his company have anything to do with this? And each time, there's a ruling that is, that suggests Rauner had a hand in it. Then what I found was, we'd get another ruling in another venue that just completely undercut it. And so it's like quicksand in a way where, and the Democrats are facing that. That nursing home story, I had one union member tell me back in the primary, they regarded that as their silver bullet with Rauner, and it hasn't been the silver bullet. And that just demonstrates that getting stuff to stick against Bruce Rauner is exceptionally difficult for the Democrats. So that's why I think we see this class warfare thing playing out. I
think it's getting stuff to stick, and it's also just frustration. People almost, it seems like you talk to people, they don't care. They just want somebody that's not Quinn. That's part of the issue, that there's just such frustration with how things have been going, how state government's running, that it doesn't matter. Fine, get somebody in there, change a pace, we can figure it out 4 years from now, see what comes. He's clearly been successful. Whatever, bodies he had to stash along the way, he made a lot of money and he did something right, so let's get that sort of figurehead in Illinois government. I think that's another part of it where you have a lot of that sentiment. It's also hard to glean, though. I mean, it's not only Rauner's past, but also his potential future and what he would do. So even with taxes, where he was very upfront that he's going to take it back to 3%, and then did open the door for, I don't know quite what he opened the door for, more than that, and it's really hard to tell just how much he thinks the tax rate should be, or when should it drop off, what's he going to do. He did, I think, to the surprise and to some members of the GOP's consternation, say that he would want to tax some services. And so, yes, as Madeleine said, for some people, that is really an inappropriate line for him to have gone down. And you're still seeing Rauner trying to straddle the GOP primary, the Rauner that was when it was government union bosses, every other word, that has somehow just gone into oblivion. He's said those words so much that he can't utter them ever again or something. I don't know. It's a totally different Rauner.
We never hear that anymore from Rauner. And Amanda,
it's negotiate.
Well, and a point that you just made about this sort of voter attitude, like, well, get anybody in there and they can do a better job. Just make the trains run on time. Just manage things. Well, I think there was a fair amount of that 4 years ago, too. And, 4 years ago, right about this time, Bill Brady had double-digit leads in a whole lot of polls. And we know what happened then. I think what is a whole lot different this time around is that with Rauner, because he doesn't really like to talk about this even now a whole lot, but he's pretty moderate on a lot of social issues where, Bill Brady wasn't. And Bill Brady lost the election because he performed so absolutely poorly in the city of Chicago in 2010. And I think that, as Rauner said, as he told the State Central Committee yesterday, the Republican, Bill Brady lost the 2010 election by something like 3 votes per precinct statewide, 32,000 votes, less than 1%. I think if you're trying to get out the vote, if you put it in that kind of language, hey, 3 votes per precinct and we could have had this thing, I think that's where, he can really generate some interest in getting out the vote.
I've been struck early on after the primary when Bruce Rauner's wife, Diana, was on a commercial and said, Bruce has no social agenda. So what does that mean for someone who wants to run the state of Illinois? Pat Quinn clearly runs on a social agenda. We have same-sex marriage. He ended the death penalty, if you could put it, in the broad base of social agenda. Bill Brady, says that, I don't know, he looks at it both ways. Did he make a mistake in emphasizing his social agenda? He was so pro-life. Bruce Rauner does say he's pro-choice, but doesn't talk about it. He doesn't talk about same-sex marriage other than to have said it should have gone to referendum, and has never said what he thinks, which got the gay community very upset during the Pride Parade in Chicago, you know, because he said to one group in a downstate city, you know, I would veto it if I didn't have that vote, and so I would veto it was on a big poster by the Pride Parade. So, you know, Rauner, I don't know if he wants to build back support in that community. I'm sure he does, but, you know, it has hurt him some, but maybe his tack is smart to say nothing about these things and let people not know where you are, and then don't have a backlash because you're so pro-life like Bill Brady was.
Right, and I think that, my opinion, and I don't like to look at this in strictly political terms because I think that's kind of cynical, but in this case, I always thought that the greatest gift that the Democrats gave to Bruce Rauner in this election was passing gay marriage and Governor Quinn signing it into law, because
now we're not asking him about it every 2 seconds.
Right, and all Rauner has to say is, no, I'm not going to try to repeal it. It's over. I have nothing to do with it. It's law. End of story. If that were still in play.
But the Democrats are very much trying to use that issue still to drum up opposition to
But
Rauner.
I think that since it's already law, since it's not something that's pending, since it's not something that's going to come across his desk and he might be able to veto, it's a lot less of a, it's
Not front page
not
news.
much of a weapon.
Yeah, I don't know. I just think it's a winning formula for a candidate like Rauner to be silent or certainly moderate on social issues, because it clobbers the Republicans every election that these social issues come up. And I think, you know, in some ways, like, you know, you look at a candidate like Judy Topinka, you know, she was is a moderate, but yet she didn't have the financial wherewithal to really make a race of it. She got outspent by Blagojevich like crazy, and I think in Rauner, you know, you look back to Edgar, you look back to George Bryan, you look back to Thompson. These guys are all cut out of the same fabric, where they're you know, fiscal conservatives, social moderates, and those are the Republicans who can win in Illinois, even though we are a blue state. And I think that I just think, though, from a standpoint as a voter, I hate the fact you know, forget the fact that they won't answer our questions. That's who cares. But it's like, you know, as an electorate, you know, we're all kind of like, you know, you wouldn't buy a car that way if somebody said, well, you know, I'm not going to tell you if the air conditioning works, you know, and that's kind of what we have right now.
Or if there's gas in the tank.
Or whatever, yeah, you know, and at least you have to credit Quinn, because he has been clear on what his positions are with the tax increase, for example, and he does have a record, and you know, you may agree with it or you may disagree with it, but I do find it refreshing. And Quinn, it's pretty clear. You know, we know what his positions are on things. With Rauner, we don't.
Yeah, well, with Quinn saying, I want to extend, you know, keep the personal income tax at 5%. It's clearly a vulnerability. It's clearly, you know, I mean, Dawn Clark-Netsch also, when she ran against Edgar in '94, was bold because she said she wanted an increase in income taxes to lower property taxes. That didn't work. So Quinn's saying, I'm for keeping it at 5%. It's bold and it's dangerous. For Rauner, I'm the one that wants to lower your tax rate to 3 again. Rauner has changed it, as Amanda said, but his rhetoric hasn't. You know, at the fair yesterday, I was the one who was able to yell one of the last questions. Well, you say the tax rate might stay the same. You say you might want to tax services. Why are you different from Quinn? I want to lower it. I'm the tax lowerer. Quinn's the tax raiser. That's it. And that's his political answer, and that's what's going to stay.
Yeah, that has been frustrating if you're just doing simple math. And I think that's, Madeleine, you mentioned that when Rauner has made statements this summer, he's tended to get himself into trouble. You know, we're looking at, he came out with a tax plan that, you know, oh, we're going to save a few million here or there. Well, we're looking at billions of dollars in potential loss of revenue when that tax rate falls down, and no one has really addressed, you know, how are we going to recover from that? I want to talk about, I don't want to miss a chance to talk about money in this race. We have to talk about money because nobody's ever seen a race like this. And the candidates filed their quarterly financial statements on July 15th. And Bruce Rauner had raised $8 million during that quarter. He spent $6 million. He's already advertising a lot. And he has $3.5 million on hand. Pat Quinn ended the quarter with $11.7 million on hand. Since then, Bruce Rauner has given himself $3 million. The Republican Governors Association has chipped in $2.5 million. On the Quinn side, on July 25th, he got $500,000 from the Democratic Governors Association. He's gotten some big donations from unions. SEIU gave him over $1 million at one point. Now no matter how much the Democrats give Quinn, I think Bruce Rauner can probably reach in. Early on, the rumor was he had said that I can put $50 million into my own campaign. He said, no, I never said that, but, you know, my campaign's not going to be hurting. Is Bruce Rauner buying this election? That's the thing that we heard a lot in the Republican primary. We haven't heard a whole lot other than what Jesse White said earlier this week. Do you think he's buying the election? What does that mean? What does buying the election mean?
I mean, I don't know. I'm not sure what it means either, and frankly, I'm not really bothered by the idea that the candidate is putting a lot of money into a campaign. If I were him, I would do the exact same thing. Where it's problematic, though, is if we see where all these people get into trouble is like, you know, the classic example is Blagojevich, where he had a fundraising juggernaut early in his administration, and what we would see is just these people trading access to get state contracts and things like that. And you know, if we see that play out, as we well could with Rauner, maybe, I don't know, we could see it with Quinn too, I guess. But that's where the buying the election part is problematic. But if you're just going out and buying campaign signs, if you're going out and doing polling, you're going out and buying commercials, that's honestly what they kind of ought to be doing to get their message out. Because you know what, you think about the average person out there, they're more tuned in to ESPN or the Hallmark Channel or whatever, you know, and it's like penetrating
Does
that.
anybody watch commercials anymore?
Well, you got
to fast forward through them on your DVR.
Listen, you know, I got to tell you something.
Bernie
You know,
does.
I have probably some of you subscribe to Hulu. Do you know what that is? On Apple TV. I had a program on the other night, and you know, it was an old television program, but in between the commercials, up pops a Rauner commercial, and I'm thinking, you've seriously penetrated this deep into the process where you're doing Hulu.
Everywhere, sponsored Twitters.
Yeah.
He shows up whenever I'm searching anything. I mean, clearly my computer knows me very well, but nonetheless, Rauner messages pop up. I'm not getting that from Quinn, and when I say my computer knows me well, I just mean that I'm a geek about Illinois politics, not necessarily Rauner more so than Quinn. But I think it kind of does give people the heebie-jeebies when somebody is putting that much money into a campaign. Why is he doing that? Does he really love Illinois that much? Who has money to do those sort of things?
TV is expensive, though.
TV is expensive, and that's what you have to do. I mean, it's the reality of things, and I think almost. I think it's something that one can't really ignore as we talk constantly about how much money Rauner is putting in, that Pat Quinn has a whole lot of money behind him, even if it's not in his campaign. He's the incumbent governor. Whenever he signs a bill, it's the Governor Pat Quinn did this, Governor Pat Quinn did this, Governor Pat Quinn, blah, 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 blah. Sometimes it's bad stuff, but sometimes it's just there. People know the name. Rauner had to build up name recognition. He came out of nowhere. Quinn has the ability. He still has a state plane that he uses to fly all over the place for these bill signings, to show up in communities, to try and build support there. So when you're thinking about how much money Rauner has, you can't escape the money that we, in a sense, are putting in. I'm not alleging wrongdoing or anything in that regard. It's just he's the governor. So taxpayer money is, in a sense, also propelling his potential future remaining in that office.
Yeah, the Supreme Court years ago, even before Citizens United, said that you can spend as much on your own campaign as you want. That's the law. That's going to happen. I think, I have been saying all along, and I think it will pan out this way. Pat Quinn will have adequate resources to have his message, in addition to being governor, despite the fact that some people, including Don Tracy in our audience, doesn't like the fact that unions that negotiate with government can still donate. Unions can still donate to candidates, as was just mentioned with SEIU, and they are going to be giving, remembering what Bruce Rauner said in the primary campaign about union bosses and all of that. And I think that and the Democratic Governors Association, whatever resources come to bear will be there. You're going to, Bruce Rauner, as he is, he says he's not a billionaire, kind of depending on the market, so it's where the investments are. But if you want that job, why not do everything you can to get it? That's legal. There may be problems coming up if so much money goes to other groups in other ways. He's donating a lot to Republican organizations. He's doing it proudly. If he gives, money to others, like this thing Jesse White talked about the other day, questions I think may legitimately be raised because of the timing, and we're in the middle of a campaign. We've got 3 months to go. We'll see what happens.
Well, and if we don't know the source of the money too, that clearly is a problem. If we get into that situation, I don't know that we have so much yet. But if we get some of these PACs coming in and we don't know who's behind it, then
Yeah. Well, just looking at congressional races in the 13th congressional district, I think it was over $6 million last time, and a lot of it from outside groups. Just Rodney Davis versus David Gill last time. We're going to see the same with Ann Callis this time. We'll see how much outside groups get in. There is, what's the name? There's a labor-backed group that already is advertising against Rauner, which helps Quinn.
Yeah,
Illinois Freedom PAC.
Illinois Freedom PAC. So there's going to be plenty of noise out there, and those poor citizens who are watching Hulu half the time are going to have to try to figure out who's right.
It's the Dick Van Dyke Show.
Laura.
We do want to open this up for questions, but I do want to make one other point before we do that. And we a lot of in the media, you get a lot of the horse race aspect of these races, and that's to be expected. But to me, one thing that I really hope nobody loses sight of is just how important this particular gubernatorial race is to the future of Illinois. Whoever wins, because I think that the next governor is going to have to see the state through a period of reckoning like we've never seen before. They passed pension reform. There are some indications now that we may have to pay.
So maybe a redo or something.
Yes, or they would have to go back to the drawing board. My personal opinion on this is that Illinois now is paying the price for deceiving itself for so many years on how much government it really can afford. And I think if you look back, going all the way back to 1974 when the lottery started, we sort of started developing this habit like, gambling is going to bring in that extra money that we need. And, it was gambling, then it was, special taxes on different things and fees. And and then it was, over the years, when we couldn't balance the budget and we owed money into pensions, we would just make a deal and we'll balance the budget using this pension money, but we'll make a deal with the unions because this way you guys will get your raises and schools will be funded and everything. And I think that's going to end in the next 4 years. I think pension reform is going to have a lot to do with it. I think the era of procrastination and gimmicks is probably over. I don't know how we can expand gambling anymore based on, you drive down the street in Springfield, you can't go buy a bar or restaurant that doesn't have a flag flying for video gaming. What do you think? Are we headed toward the real deal here?
Well, I mean, we clearly are. I mean, you see two different scenarios. I think, just from purely a self-centered journalistic standpoint, I think a Rauner governorship would be great copy because you'd have, and especially if it's a deal where, we have a Democratic-led General Assembly, because then, you're going to have this guy who's high and mighty having to, deal with Mike Madigan. And that, talk about a clash of titans, that is going to be fascinating to cover. I mean, I could see, honestly, for a good 2-year period, if that happens, I mean, we could see gridlock here. I mean, he talks about shutdowns. I mean, that's a real likelihood. I think with Quinn, you probably have, if he wins, you have a very interesting January lame duck session where we have the question of what to do with the tax extension. And then it's just kind of more of the same. I mean, you have to hope that, like yesterday we saw unemployment numbers come out that showed, I think for the 6th consecutive year, a reduction. And so you do get a sense, a glimmer of hope that the economy is turning around and that might trickle down and benefit Illinois and be helpful. But I think it's going to be interesting to see how both these guys govern, Rauner especially if he wins.
I agree. Just in terms of a better plot line, or at least a change in it, you'd get that with a Rauner administration more so than a Quinn. But that's not any good reason to vote. But it is an interesting little asterisk to put by things. I think I overheard a Republican supporter yesterday at Rauner's event say, "We've got to convince people that this is like a race for president. It's just for the state of Illinois," which sure makes sense, but trying to just get that energy level and explain that to voters, because that's the element of things. When it's an off-year election, when there isn't a president at the top of the ballot, are people actually going to come out and vote? How does that change things? And thinking it is the appropriate way to think about it for the state and what all it means, as you said, Matt. And yet there doesn't appear to be, whereas there's excitement, fear from Democrats, and energy because of this infusion of cash from Rauner within the Republican ranks. By and large, a lot of voters, you talk to people, and nobody's excited about either guy. They are not particularly fond of how Quinn's been doing, but gosh, this Rauner guy seems a little like we're not sure what he's going to do, and it's so that is, I think, an element that is going to make it hard for people to get out there in November because they don't really want either option. And I'll add to that when you talk about how the future of Illinois could really be dependent and years of reckoning ahead. What complicates all of this, and I think what makes me fearful, is the tenor of this campaign thus far and how much it has been mascots and disciplined messaging and such. And what got Illinois to this point was kind of pretending that problems weren't problems, but we continue to see that looking forward to some extent, I think, by both candidates. And that's going to make it difficult. Maybe it gets into a little bit, we haven't talked about Rauner and term limits, waiting for a decision on that, and if it's going to be on the ballot, what have you. But where he said, when you have politicians that are trying to run again for office, it's hard sometimes to make those very honest decisions just by de facto of where their jobs are at and what they're dependent on.
Yeah, Quinn wants to raise taxes again. The legislature didn't want to do it before the election because it's a bad vote on your record as you're running for election. You might have an easier time getting that. It's a tough pill to swallow. It's no fun. Rauner keeps talking about, he thinks that a better business climate will bring, more jobs and more revenue to the state. That's all good, but some of the business reforms that he might want may not, if you're talking about workers' compensation reform, they've done some. People want to do more, certainly causation. They want to make sure the injury you get paid for is the injury at work. But a Democratic legislature with a governor who just wants his way, they may not do what he wants. So you don't know where those answers are, and so the budget hole may be big, and you don't know what's going to happen. Quinn has tried to pay a lot of pension costs, which allows Rauner to say he's given less education to the classroom because a lot of it has gone into the teacher's retirement system. It's all of these are difficult choices, and I don't exactly know what the solution is because what Dave said about gridlock is a possibility because the things Rauner says will make the state better are things that have been done in other states by Republican governors, I believe with Republican legislatures. And we don't have a Republican legislature, and even if...
We ain't gonna.
Yeah, Jim Durkin yesterday, the leader of the House Republicans, was saying how hopeful he is they can get a few seats so, Madigan, the Democrats will no longer be able to override vetoes. That would be one step, but that doesn't mean you can pass everything you want.
But with a Republican governor, that would be a significant victory. Because then, for Rauner, you would have gridlock, but you wouldn't have a governorship where the Democrats could just be forcing things down.
Which is where Rauner is giving money to all these candidates, and it's more than just his own campaign, it's the whole party apparatus.
But to your point, that's why I asked about what can we do in the media to try to get some answers out of these guys, because as Dave said, it's like buying a car without knowing whether the air conditioning is working. Neither Quinn nor Rauner has talked much about the Supreme Court's pension ruling on health care benefits, very much at all. We have some very scant details about their approach to taxes and budgeting, but instead we have Quinocchio and Baron von Moneybags, and I have a sense of humor. I appreciate a good person in a costume, but this is getting a little ridiculous. We have some serious problems we need to confront, and voters deserve to know something before they go vote.
I have a feeling we're going to see a lot more intense policy things, if there are people who are upset with Rauner businesses, or if there are people who have lost their jobs, or companies that have left the state under Quinn, you're going to see these people on TV. And a lot of that stuff, the campaigns, these are high-level folks. Now, Quinn's campaign guy was New York Mayor de Blasio's campaign advisor. Rauner has team. He brags about poaching great people from other states to come in because they've run winning campaigns. Let's not talk about that one, but Indiana and Wisconsin mostly. They're going to pop some stuff toward the end of the election that's going to drive all of us crazy trying to follow up on what's true and what's not on both sides. That usually happens, and I think as voters focus, we're going to see a lot more to focus on, and it ain't going to be pretty.
Well, and if this race does tighten up, I think, this issue of Rauner kind of being in the in the hole. I think he's going to he'll be forced to emerge and start talking more and being out in the open, I would think, if it's a tighter thing. And for Quinn, it's just, he's got to close the gap now, because he's got to keep the spigot of money flowing, because if these outside interests see that this is not a race come, the end of September, he's just going to.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I mean, I think the poll that your paper ran was about 11-point difference, and of course the poll that Quinn's own campaign had a couple weeks ago was 1 point, which I don't know.
And the IEA poll was, I think, 3 or 4.
Okay, so it's interesting. I mean, just a little history, but when Tribune polls back when George Ryan was running in '98 against Glenn Prichard showed a few months out or several weeks out that Glenn Prichard was down 25 points. Prichard said, that poll killed me because nobody would donate to me anymore. So I don't know who's doing polls, and I don't know how good they are.
Polls can be publicity sometimes.
But Dave is exactly right. If people perceive you the loser, then things dry up. I don't know if that'll happen this time with these other issues with kind of the Rauner's not going to run out of money no matter what. And those who dislike him and want Quinn to stay in a Democratic administration for various reasons may keep contributing too. So it may not be that big a deal this year, but it does help a candidate to be within striking distance.
Well, we've got a few minutes left. Let's try to take a couple questions. But a word of caution, please make them very brief and make it a question. Go right ahead. And I'll repeat them for the sake of the video on the microphone.
I'd like Dave to go into more detail to the poll that they ran on Monday that Bernie just referenced. The crosstabs on it were very interesting, and I think it probably shows some Quinn fatigue.
Yeah, I mean, the crosstabs were interesting, and of course, people do take issue with the methodology that We Ask America uses. It's an automated poll mostly. There's a question about whether they've got a good mix of cell phones and landlines, and there's much more accuracy in a poll that involves a person talking to another person. That said, what those crosstabs showed was that Rauner right now is walking away with the independents, which is interesting. Rauner has a fairly high number of Democrats who are willing to be with him as well, I thought. And then geographically he's swamping Quinn downstate and in the collar counties, as you'd expect. But his number in the suburban Cook was interesting because he was ahead. I think it was like 46 to 42. That's a very ominous sign for Quinn if he can't turn that around. And in the city, I think the number of the level of Rauner support was like 19%. Right. And that, there's always a lot of talk among Republicans that you got to be at that 20% city benchmark in order to be competitive statewide. And so Rauner is within shouting distance there, and that's why you see him making these outreaches to black ministers, because he wants to tamp down Quinn's support. He wants to, he's just got to do that. So I think, all the wins right now are at Rauner's back, but I think really over the last couple of weeks we've gotten a sense, especially like with this Cayman Islands thing, where it's easy for people to understand. Quinn has had a good week or two. And if you can stack another good 2 or 3 weeks on top of this, then suddenly maybe things start breaking his way.
Maybe those ballot initiatives too. You saw at the Democratic breakfast, every table, every seat had basically a little brochure that reminded people of all the ballot initiatives that were going to be on up to people in November, and trying to drive people out for it. Hey, we'll remind you. There'll be interest groups that bring people out for that. So that's another added segment.
And that's minimum wage and the millionaire tax. 2 big issues with the Democratic
and also birth
base.
Control coverage.
Birth control coverage. Sure. And Dave, just to add to the Sun-Times poll, what I found most interesting about that particular poll was the question about who do you see as the reform candidate, and the respondents overwhelmingly chose Rauner over Quinn, which is
well, and that gets to your idea of fatigue, because and for Quinn to have this neighborhood recovery initiative thing, it just sits out there kind of like a cancer. It won't go away. We have a criminal grand jury in Springfield that is said to be investigating. Subpoenas going around.
And there's somebody in the audience who would know about that.
Who might be willing to volunteer to advance the story in some way here. But what you see with that story is just like every couple of weeks there's another revelation of where a batch of emails come out, and we see all right, well, maybe politics did factor into how these grants were laid out. It was just a sloppy program, and arguably there could be some fraud in there, and that just is hard to you know, this was Quinn's baby. So I don't know. It'll be interesting to see the pace at which the U.S. Attorney's Office and that grand jury operate, because if there's anything before the election, as we all know, that could be potent.
One more?
Too quick and keep
Go ahead.
your answers short, please. One, would you care to speculate on the possibility of soft support in Cook County for Pat Quinn based on the concept of reckoning, where they would have bipartisan blame as opposed to running the risk of having a Republican state for 20 or 30 years by having Democrats do all the reckoning? Secondly, it's evident that your frustration with Rauner and not being able to get information from him just drives you crazy. You spoke 80% about Rauner and barely more than honorable mention about Quinn. I know that in Bernie's column it's a running theme. Rauner won't tell me this, Rauner won't tell me that. Regarding the need to get answers, which is a fair need, why is it not a running theme that what Quinn said about a temporary tax? What's the difference whatever he said 3 years ago or 4 years ago? It's just not true. So there is a certain amount of, yes, we want them to tell us things, but then again, just because they tell you, why is that not a running theme also, that what Quinn tells you may or may not be true, Rauner's not telling us?
Quick answer to the second question. Quinn said it was on the record, it was in public. He said, I want it to be temporary. It's not temporary. Everybody knows it. It's there. If you ask Rauner, you know, how much land do you own, and he doesn't tell you, it's not there until somebody finds out.
I think second question, part of it's also maybe, admittedly, a part of Quinn fatigue. I mean, you've covered the guy, whoever, there's a lot to uncover new about Rauner. And so that's part of it. I do think I will add, in terms of a Quinn issue that is on his back, but also another instance where maybe he said something, and just because they say something doesn't make it so. What's going on with the investigation into hiring at the Illinois Department of Transportation? I think John O'Connor's piece that revealed that, oh wait, the changes that I've been saying actually never came to fruition. We're still working on those. I can't prove to you that it's happened. That should be damning for Quinn. Again, guy who tries to build himself up and identify himself as a reformer and good government guy, but lo and behold, oh wait, you that was basically a lie. I don't think there's any way that you can twist that, or who knows, if so, he hasn't proven otherwise. As to your first question, I think that there are those angles. The issue, sure, maybe let's not work that hard, bring a Republican in there, let the Republican do the dirty work, or at some point, people want change, you're not going to have Democratic rule forever, let's get somebody in, get rid of Quinn, get somebody else. Maybe that might be talked about, but I don't think that that's how voters think. You're still clearly seeing unions don't want that, there's a lot of money and support, so whereas we can pontificate about that, I'm not quite sure that that translates into reality.
And do we have time for one more? Oh. One thing about the
really
Citizens
good.
Club is we are
He's
disciplined. They are disciplined. I want to
Just
thank.
like the candidates.
Well, thanks. So that's all the time we've got for now. I want to thank everybody for showing up. We do a daily email at Reboot Illinois. If you'd like to get it, you can visit our website, rebootillinois.com, or talk to Madeleine and I. We'll
Or
get
we have
you
a bowl
signed
in the
up.
back of the room you can drop your business
And
card in, or
if you-
slip of paper.
And I want to thank Bernie, Amanda, Dave for showing up, and all of you. And please get out and vote and read those stories carefully. Thank you.